it's 7 a.m., around 7 a.m. So it's very early. And for this, thank you. I would like to thank you so much for your availability to having this interview with me. For me, on behalf of PerFormat, it's a great honor to talk to you about anxiety in the digital age and what happens to our bodies in virtual reality.
Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here, sort of here, and to see you and talk with you. And I want to start with a thank you for the invitation, because I was quite excited to receive it and thought that it was a really interesting topic and one that we don't really think about enough. And also to apologize for not actually, being with you in the flesh, so to speak. When I accepted the invitation, I wasn't looking realistically at my schedule, and then it was just impossible for me to actually make the trip. So it's kind of ironic or paradoxical that here we are with the topic of the conversation and the whole conference, and I'm here in virtual reality. So as I was thinking about where to start, I was imagining if I made this trip, what would be different. And so I was thinking about what it would be like to be in a region I've never actually visited before, meet people, person to person, be in the environment and feel it, probably share a meal together, and hopefully a good bottle of wine, and all these things that in our bodies start to, tell us about each other. So here we are on screens yet again. So, yeah. So if I was thinking about how to frame our conversation. In my understanding of anxiety, anxiety has to do with the loss of structure, the loss of psychological structure, the loss of interpersonal structure, the loss of bodily structure, so from a developmental perspective, for me, our bodies and the kind of integrity and coherence, the vitality of the body is fundamental to psychological structure and emotional structure. And so really from infancy on, there's a kind of constant back and forth between how our bodies learn and develop and what happens in our primary relationships. We, as infants and young children, develop more and more coherence and cohesion in our bodies as we learn to do things and find out that having a body is a good deal. Hopefully. It's not everybody's lesson. And then through our interpersonal relationships, mom, dad, the family, that also provide, a fundamental psychological and emotional structure. And we, I think, over the course of our life, we use back and forth. And we tend to, in most psychological theories, and I think in TA, pay more attention to the relational parts of structure, and don't always pay enough attention to the body component. So one of the central ideas for me from TA is Burns' concept of the human hungers: structure, recognition, stimulation. And so one of the things that I think about in terms of what's happening to the body in the digital age is that there's an enormous amount of stimulation, and I think overstimulation, and we don't have the body-to-body contact that I think is so important to maintain psychological structure, and important to process the kinds of stimulation that are coming at us. So there's a lot of verbal stimulation. And there's a lot of visual stimulation. But our other senses are not involved in the digital age, and I think that's part of the disorganization that we're seeing. We're seeing in clients, we're seeing politically, we're seeing socially, that there are these fundamental ways that I think the virtual realities, they're missing fundamental parts of reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll stop there.
Let's begin with the first question. And what's your opinion about this? In your opinion, has the digital society increased the occurrence of anxiety related to psychopathologies?
Yes, definitely. And I think we're only starting to witness the consequences. And it's almost as though the digital age is creating new kinds of psychological and emotional problems. I see it, with many of my clients. The intrusiveness of the digital data, the incredible emphasis now on, and it's ironic to me, what's called social media, which I think would be more accurately called anti-social media, because people feel so both inundated by information, but also exposed in ways that they can't control. The amount of time that people spend on their phones and computers is extraordinary, and you're not actually in contact with the other person. It's a pseudo contact, and I think there's an extraordinary vulnerability. Like here, you and I are talking, and if I had a Facebook account, you show this at the conference, and fortunately we see each other, we can have a conversation. And usually if I'm giving a talk at a conference, I see people, I see their faces, I can see, all right, we have to talk about this a little bit more, or people don't like what I just said. There's feedback. But here, what would the feedback be? You know, if I had a Facebook account, the people could go on Facebook and say, I like it or I don't like it, thumbs up, thumbs down. That's it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and when I see teenagers and young adults, particularly, the level of social pressure creates an enormous amount of anxiety, and I think also sometimes shame, without a way of processing it adequately.
You talked before about the anxiety and the somatic experience of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
According to you, is anxiety a somatic experience for the majority of people?
I think, I think anxiety is human and inevitable. I think that, it's increasingly difficult or even debilitating for a number of people. And I think that if we have a close friend or a parent and we're upset about something and anxious, uncertain, and we can turn to them and sit with them and talk and feel each other's presence, that's enormously calming. And I think that we manage anxiety, hopefully, through the quality of our relationships. Being able to feel and express concern and understanding to one another. I think that's one of the functions of empathy. And in digital media and social media, those functions are really diminished. And I'm on an online colloquium right now, a psychoanalytic colloquium, and it's been really disturbing because the ideas that were supposed to be discussed were interesting to me, but the quality of the conversation is often very aggressive and demeaning, and which I think also is related to anxiety. We're not quite human to each other in these digital formats. So the kind of experiences that I think calm us down at a somatic level are, for the most part, missing in virtual communication, especially when we're in trouble. Does that make some sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
You are an expert in somatic therapy in transactional analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So, which are the steps that a therapist should follow in treating a patient?
From a somatic?
Yeah, from a somatic point of view, yeah.
I wouldn't exactly say that there's a sequence of steps. I think that there's a process and a way of looking, noticing what's happening in a session. Okay. One of the important influences in my thinking about the body and working at a somatic level has been Winnicott. And Winnicott had this concept of what he called the spontaneous gesture, that infants and young children are constantly moving, they're expressing something, but they don't actually know it's a form of communication. It's an activity, and that it's the response of the parent, how they receive the activity of the child's body that moves, that changes movement into communication, and changes pure physical movement into an emotional expression, and as a child matures into verbal. Okay. And when we think about the defenses at a body level, for whatever reasons, the child's freedom of movement gets more and more restricted. And that's what Reich talked about. My original training was in a Reichian model and his idea of muscular armor. So, you know, I've come to think of what Reich called muscular armor as gestures that that have become inhibited, interrupted. And so for the therapist, I think the most important thing working somatically is paying attention to all the nonverbal qualities of communication. And when does something get cut off or diminished, or you know, you can kind of see a forward movement and then suddenly a person freezes, or a person can't maintain eye contact. The voice changes. All of these, often subtle, and they're mostly nonverbal things that add to the depth of our communication. And so I think to be able to see, hear, and feel in our own bodies as therapists what starts to emerge and then what suddenly gets diminished or cut off. So to try to really give meaning to those interruptions and kind of call the body more fully into the room. So it's not exactly step by step. It's really a quality of attention. And, you know, we so often get, I mean, all of us, I think, when we're sitting with a client in a session or in a group, we get pulled into the content and problem solving. And I think what a somatic perspective brings is helps us shift from attending primarily to content and to notice more fully the process of communication.
Okay, that's interesting. And where do you suggest that the treatment should start from? From the body, from the mind? Should it be a breathing experience or a talking cure?
I think both.
Yeah.
You know, our capacity to talk and think is really important, obviously. But when I start with a new client, I'll often say to a person, you know, in psychotherapy, we spend most of our time in psychotherapy talking to each other and thinking together and hopefully opening up our thinking. But we don't only talk with words. We talk with our bodies, and often our bodies are communicating something that we're not fully conscious of. And sometimes our bodies are communicating ways that we're in trouble and we don't know how to put into words, or we don't feel safe putting into words. So there are going to be times when I'll be speaking to something that I notice in your body. to help bring our bodies into conversation.
Mm.
And you can also say something to me about, what you're sensing, wondering, imagining that's going on for me. Because our clients also see things, in how we're paying attention, or, do we pull back from something, or do we get really interested in something? We're also communicating non-verbally all the time. And so I think it's important to give permission to our clients to also be able to comment on not only what we say, but how we say it, or how we show it.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah. And you already told something about that, but I would ask you, what about the body of the therapist during psychotherapy?
Yeah, I think we're really good with theories that give us ways of thinking and using our minds as instruments, tools. And from my frame of reference, we don't do enough training in how to really make use of our experience of our bodies in relation to the other. And, so we have, these days, we pay a lot of attention to countertransference, transference, countertransference dynamics, which has obviously something to do with the therapist's body. But there's another term from the somatic perspective. It has different terms, but my favorite is the notion of emotional resonance. That I'm able in my own body to be kind of open, receptive, noticing effects that a particular client is having in my body and on my body. And that becomes a really valuable resource. Just a brief example, a session with a fairly new client who was very bright, very accomplished, but she didn't quite know why she was in therapy. And she didn't really know what therapy was exactly, except a friend told her she should go see a therapist. So, we're kind of finding our way. And she said to me, I don't know why I'm here. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I don't either. Yeah, I think we're still figuring that out. Mm-hmm. And she said, so what's it like for you? It was a great question from a client. Okay. And I said, well, you're kind of sitting there. We're talking to each other. You always sit in the middle of the couch. But I kind of feel like there's another person kind of off to the side of the couch who never speaks. It's like you set part of yourself aside. I said, maybe that's weird, but that's just, that's what keeps happening for me in my body. And she just looked at me and she said, I know exactly what you mean. I'm always setting myself aside. And then, so suddenly she knew why she was in therapy, So there wasn't anything in the content that was, we had things to talk about, but it was that moment of the physicality of our being together and this weird sensation I kept having in my body that suddenly, she recognized something really important.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
I would like to talk with you about traumas, because we know that the body maintains the somatic memory of traumas. So, how would you describe this process?
Yeah. That's a big question we could talk about for a long time.
Big question.
No, I think that the impact of trauma is that the body's capacity to process the experience is overwhelmed. It's shattered, and so physically, emotionally, bodily, unconsciously, the body has to do something to get rid of the distress and the disturbance. And so there's an intense retreat, typically, or dissociation, sometimes from the memories of the event, from the physical experience of the event, from situations that remind us of the event and then become very dangerous. So there's a quality of, in the face of unresolved trauma, like I diminish my connection to myself, and I diminish the freedom I have, in really being in the world. And I think that when the environment acknowledges the trauma and responds to it actively, then we have other people who are helping process something that right now my body can't process. So, trauma in and of itself does not have to be devastating. But when the trauma is not recognized, then, our bodies just have a fundamental survival situation that, I have to protect myself from something I can't help.
Okay, good. So, yeah.
I'll give you, for me, one of the most important experiences I've had. This was not as a therapist. This was as a father. 20 years ago now, my youngest son was badly burned in a campfire, and he was in a hospital. And obviously, that was a horrendous trauma for him and for the family. But this hospital had a way of not only treating the physical injuries, but the emotional injuries very, very actively and directly. And on the unit, after the unit, every possible way, the responsiveness of the treatment unit and the way that they approached burns was extraordinary. And so I could see my son go through something that could have literally scarred him physically and emotionally for life. And it does not have those lingering consequences because of the response of the people around him and the things they taught me to do as a father too, which were a whole level of active engagement that I probably wouldn't have been able to do without the support I received. So that's, I think, so important in our understanding of trauma. There are times when our bodies don't have the capacity to work with something or heal something. And then, we are really dependent on others.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Bill, for talking about also your experience. And yeah, this is the last question.
Okay.
And I would like to ask you to talk about the somatic life script. And talking about the somatic life script, do you think it could be altered or modified in some way with the psychotherapy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually don't have any question about that. When we think about the somatic, the somatic component of script, in Burns' language, I think that's what he was trying to talk about with his idea of the protocol, the script protocol, what precedes the formation of script. And that's what he referred to as being in the tissue of the body. It's the things we learn about what's possible and what's impossible, what's safe and what's dangerous, long before we have language. And if we're lucky and we've got a pretty good family, at the body level we have a freedom. But when that's not the case, the somatic level of script is constantly saying, be careful, pulling back rather than being able to go forward. And I think that our capacity to, as therapists and as counselors, to really welcome the parts of a person that are in trouble, parts of a person that rarely feel safe. We may be problem solving and talking about different issues at a verbal level, but that fundamental welcoming of the troubled places in a person, I think, change script at a somatic level. So, yeah, I feel, really very optimistic about being able to change at the somatic level.
Okay.
Okay.
Bill, so what can I say? For me, it was a great pleasure to ask some questions about TA and somatic aspects of TA. I found this interview very deep, and I felt a great connection with you. Also, if we are in a virtual relationship, so I just want to thank you another time for your availability and for your deep thinking, a deep statement about a complex aspect of TA therapy. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really been a pleasure, and I'm so glad we figured out an alternative because, and I think it's worked pretty well. So you get to see a little bit of my world behind me here. I'm sitting in my office, so I don't get to see your world, but hopefully another time we'll work out another time to get me there.
Okay. Yes. So we will wait. We will wait for you in next year's.
Yep, I'm working on it.
Okay. It will be a pleasure.